Happy Intellectual Tuesday, and welcome to yet another installment of my little Intellectual Tuesday series. So, you might be wondering, what have I brought you here on this fine April 12th to talk about? And oh, man, I'm so glad you asked. Um, this is kind of a test run of a more podcasty type format. So, I'm talking off the cusp here, all of this in practice for a podcast on Belgium that I plan on doing. I've talked about that a little bit in the past. It's going to be a multi-part series about Belgium during the first, essentially, month of World War One, so August of 1914. Anyways, so this is just practice for that, which is great. Although this one is a lot more non-serious in tone. That one will be a lot more serious. But this one, we can be loose with it. So that's what we're gonna do. And the topic might not seem that way, but we'll get there. We'll get there. So today's topic, I'm gonna call it like academic regret or something. And let me explain, right? So I was an Asian studies major in college, and I really, really liked Asian studies. I was able to learn a lot about Asia, learned primarily about East Asia, but I also got the chance to learn about India and South Asia as I progressed through the course. And I thought that that was super cool. That was an area that I knew nothing about. I had taken Mandarin back in the day, and I was able to know about East Asia, but South Asia was somewhere that was kind of just a mystery to me. So I found it super cool to learn a lot about South Asia. And in the process of my Asian studies career, I got introduced to a lot of different things that I'm super interested in, as it turns out. um, and I'd kind of like to talk about that because I don't know. I kind of think of like a butterfly effect, or kind of like a like a web of decisions that could have been made to where maybe I wouldn't have been an Asian studies major in another life. And so there's a couple of these topics I was introduced to that were just fascinating to me. The first is anthropology. I took a couple of anthropology classes, and oh my god, I love it. I focused mainly on cultural anthropology, as with Asian studies, I was focusing on how cultures interacted. So, how does Chinese culture, for example, interact with Indian culture, right? And so, one of the classes I took for it was cultural anthropology. Now, in that class in particular, I focused mainly on indigenous peoples. Trying to use the right word there. So people like the Hadza out in Africa, or the Yanomamo in the Amazon. Um, and I thought that was super cool. Just the process of looking at people and how they interact with one another, and how that forms their culture, how that forms their stories of themselves, and how those stories of themselves and how their cultures also form how they interact with each other. So it's kind of that, like, that cyclical process. I thought that was super cool. So anthropology is definitely one of those areas that I was very interested in. Another is history and archaeology. So full disclosure, I was a history minor, so I definitely got my fair share of history. um, but through history, I was introduced to archaeology. Now, I've always been a big fan of Indiana Jones, so I've always been like tangentially interested in archaeology. And seeing it done through my history classes, seeing what some of my professors have done. In fact, I even got invited on a archaeological dig to Florence, Italy. Um, however, COVID, right? So darn. But I just find it so interesting that, like, we can learn about us as a species by digging in some certain places, right? And there's archaeology everywhere, and I think people don't necessarily realize that here in the Americas, at least, we tend to have what we think of as less history, and I don't. I don't agree with that personally. I think that there's a lot of history here. Just the peoples that were here did not write. You had like, well, you had like the Aztecs and the Mayans that wrote for sure. Um, with you had like the Inca who did the knots. That was their form of like reading. I think I forget the name, like Kipu or something like that. Um, but by and large, Native American writing pre-Columbus wasn't a huge thing. Um, but man, they were sure out here, and we can tell because of archaeology. Take like the sides of rivers, for example. Arrowheads, you'll find them there. It's cool. And that tells you how they hunted, right? They waited for animals to come to the river, then they shot, and I guess in our case missed if we're finding the arrowhead. But to me, that's really cool. And not to mention, like the other more, I guess, rather less overt parts to the Native American story that we forget about. Native Americans been in the Americas for a very long time, right? And we can see that actually out in Waco, of all places. There's a rock shelter that was found with remains that I don't remember off the top of my head, um, but fairly old, at least like 2,000 plus years old. So very old. And like Waco itself is a kind of a treasure trove of fossils. Like they have like the mammoth site out there. So lots of cool stuff with archaeology. Not just something, same with anthropology, archaeology, history, something that like I could have seen myself majoring in. Same with a couple more things I'm going to talk about here. I'll try to be a little bit quick. Um, First being geology. I think rocks are really cool, and if you've ever been to my apartment, you'll notice I have a rock collection that just lines like the windowsills. I like rocks. Hey, they're cool. I really like the story of Earth, and I think it's cool to see how Earth formed. I took a couple geology classes in college, and I just thought it was cool to see like how different rocks are formed, how these processes happen, and then being able to see that in nature. Like you can go drive somewhere here in Texas, and you'll have roads that cut through like hills, and when you're looking at the rock that's exposed because your road is driving straight to it, you can see like kind of the story of archaeology, like how the rocks were formed, how they were layered. Some of them will be like almost like layered like a cake, and some of those will be like on their side, like the French flag or like vertical, right? So I just think it's really cool. So geology, that's another thing that I could see myself majoring in. Like if I was go back and do it all again, archaeology is one of them. The last two, paleontology is one, and I think this kind of combines archaeology and geology, um, and obviously biology as well. But taking all of those different things in, because I think the story of what used to be on Earth is also incredibly fascinating. If you've been watching my channel, my last couple of videos have been like dinosaur centric. I mean, come on, dinosaurs are cool. The Alamosaurus, absolute legend. So, I just find that very interesting, right? It's just one of those things. It's just like, wow, like that's awesome. And then finally, and this one's like out of left field. It actually has to do with biology. It's marine biology, specifically stuff dealing with like the deep ocean. There's so much about our ocean that we don't know about, that we don't understand. Um, I mentioned I don't know if I mentioned, at least I researched in Humans Are Predators, that video I talked about like all these animals aren't predators. Like just to go on a tangent for a sec, like sharks to me are fascinating because for so long we've thought of sharks as like these big baddies that just eat people, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Like we're way too like bony and stringy for sharks. I don't like the way we taste. So I mean, hey, that's good. If you ever find yourself in that situation, you probably won't be eaten. But I'd love to learn more about sharks, right? Like there are not a lot of shark like biologists out there. Like I heard in an interview, there's somewhere like 100 in the world, right? That's not a lot, and I would assess that there's even less for things like deep sea marine biology, or maybe a comparable number. I don't know, but I just think it's so interesting to see how life functions at different stratas of Earth, right? So you have like things on land, things in caves, you have things that are like kind of towards the top of the ocean, and then things way down at the bottom. Even like deep sea vents, like those like geothermal vents. You'll even see life there. And I think that that's so incredible that like life has found a way from flying in the sky all the way down to the deepest parts of our ocean. So that's just super cool to me. Um, so why am I bringing any of this up? Right? Like this is all cool. Um, well, actually, yeah. Before I get into that, there's two other areas I'm just going to mention. One is physics. I think physics is super cool. I think like space and physics, awesome. And then the other is language. I speak Mandarin, a little bit of Russian, and a bit more German. I think language is really cool. So like seeing how different languages interact and how a language evolves over time, very cool to me. Anyways, so why am I bringing any of this up? Well, I bring up all these different areas because I feel like in another life I could have gone back and majored in them. Now I know I still have the opportunity to get more schooling. Eventually, I will get my master's, probably in Asian studies, but maybe not. Right? Um, well, I bring it up because of the topic of today's video, and that's academic regret. Right? Um, and I kind of just wanted to talk about that. Like I really appreciated Asian studies. I thought it was cool that all of these different things that I talked to, with maybe the exception of marine biology and physics for that matter, I was introduced to in part through Asian studies. Right. I've been doing the language thing for a while, but like pre-college, I didn't know really anything about anthropology. I knew a bit about archaeology. I knew a bit about history. Um, couldn't I didn't really know about geology. I take geology as part of Asian studies. How cool is that? You know, um, but yeah. So just all these different things, and like I know, like while I was in class for all those different topics, I thought to myself, like I had the conscious thought, like, man, what if I majored in that, right? And I didn't. And looking back now, like there's kind of that sense of longing, right? That maybe regret is too strong of a word because I'm really happy with the choice that I made. But at the same time, there's like, wow, there's so much more that I could have learned, or I could have delved way deeper into this subject that I think is already fascinating, right? So I just want to talk about that just because I think it's interesting. Um, and I think I can boil it down to at least two thoughts I'm having about that. The first is the grass is always going to look greener on the other side, right? I'm sure had I like decided to major in geology or archaeology or anthropology, I would have been like, man, what if I would have majored in Asian studies instead, right? So I'm sure the grass is always like a little bit greener on the other side. Um, but another is like, in a way, like I don't know. This is just my opinion here. It almost doesn't necessarily matter what you major in as long as you like it, right? Because I think as we live, as we continue doing our thing, we um we get the opportunity to learn more and more about these things that interest us. Gosh, if I could speak. Um, and that's kind of what I've been doing, like just thinking about it. Like I see all these things that I've really appreciated, learned about, whatnot, that I didn't get to dive deep into. But now that I'm out of college, off in the real world, right? I do have time to myself, and in a way, I'm able to express that through things like these intellectual Tuesdays, where I'm able to like really look into some of these things that I still have an interest in. And sure, I might not have a formal education on geology, right? Outside of the classes that I took, but I could still learn about it, like just in my free time, just being a man of learning, right? Um, yeah, I didn't have a formal education in marine biology or archaeology or anthropology, but I could still learn about all these things on my own, right? And that's almost the point of this video is I guess my big takeaway for this intellectual Tuesday is that if there's something out there that you want to learn more about, like right now, right now is literally the best time in the world to ever try to learn something, or to ever like anything that like piques your interest, anything that you're like, maybe as a kid you thought it was cool but now you're like, I don't know if I have time to learn about that. Man, I would say go for it, because we have the information of the world at our fingertips, like Google or like Bing or whatever search engine you use. That can help bring you to a lot of these really interesting places. And I don't know. Some people tell me I'm smart. I would probably disagree with that sometimes. Um, but I think one of the things that I've done to maybe at least give the appearance of seeming smart is I just go on like whatever and just read about whatever it is that I'm interested in. So, things like religion or things like geology or paleontology, whatever, right? Like I'll just read about that. And I would encourage you to go do the same thing. Whatever it is that interests you, like right now is literally the greatest time in the history of man to go learn about it. And there's so many really cool resources to do that. I mean, we have Wikipedia, as like growing up, I was always told that Wikipedia is not a source, and like, you might be right, but it is a great launching place because like the bottom of every Wikipedia article is like a link to like where they got their information from, and those are great, just wonderful like jumping off points to learning about whatever it is that you're interested in. So if you're looking up like something, let's say like baking really interests you, right? Then you could maybe look up like different baking techniques from Wikipedia. In fact, that might have been like the worst example to use. Uh, I'll use a better example. If I'm interested in like the history of Belgium, like I have been recently, one of the places where I started off was looking up like the atrocities in Belgium in 1914. I looked up the Wikipedia article about that, and on the bottom it had a whole bunch of different links to books. And so I was able to go to those books and check them out. And with the internet and with being like connected with people, I actually like emailed museums in Germany, in England, in Belgium, and in the United States to learn more and to try and see what resources they had to help me with this Belgium project. So obviously, I was not a Belgium major. I don't speak Dutch. I don't speak French. But I was able to do that because of the internet, and I would encourage you to do so as well. So thank you for listening to my like way too long rant about like the things I'm interested in, and that you can be interested in your things too. And I just felt like it's just a message that has been kind of like poking at me for a while. So I thought, hey, why not talk about it on a glorious intellectual Tuesday? So again, if there's something that interests you, like go for it. It's literally never too late to keep learning, and that is one of the best things about the world that we live in. So keep learning, keep being awesome, and I will see you next Intellectual Tuesday. So until then, I guess it's time for me to hit the old dusty trail. So take care. Bye bye.